And the clockmaker's war. The snow fell silently across the Swiss Alps in the winter of 1986, each flake settling on the metal frame of a rifle that would redefine modern warfare. Rudolf Amsler crouched in the testing bunker, his weathered hands adjusting the prototype SIG SG-550, watching as the weapon's precision shattered every assumption the military establishment had held for decades. He was just a meticulous engineer from a neutral country, until the night he proved that perfection could emerge from the most unexpected places. The sound of the rifle's mechanism was like music to Rudolf's ears, a precise, clockwork symphony that reminded him of his father's workshop. Each component moved with Swiss precision, the rotating bolt inspired by the same principles that had governed timepieces for centuries. But this wasn't about keeping time. This was about keeping people alive. Colonel Weber, the chief military observer, lowered his binoculars and stared at the target downrange. 5 shots through the same hole at 300 meters, even after rapid fire that should have thrown off any rifle's accuracy through thermal stress. The free-floating barrel had worked exactly as Rudolf calculated. "This is impossible," Weber muttered. The specifications called for accuracy or durability, not both. Rudolf carefully set the rifle down, his movements deliberate and reverent. Outside the testing bunker, the Swiss Alps stretched endlessly, their peaks sharp against the winter sky. Somewhere beyond those mountains, the Cold War raged at its frozen peak. NATO forces faced a terrifying reality. Soviet doctrine emphasized overwhelming numbers and rapid mechanized advances that could crush Western Europe before reinforcements arrived. The irony wasn't lost on Rudolf. Switzerland, neutral in every conflict, had just created the weapon that might tip the balance. Traditional battle rifles were either too heavy for mobile warfare or too inaccurate for the precision engagements that mountain and urban combat demanded. Swiss military observers, studying conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan, had recognized that future soldiers would need weapons that combined the reliability of a machine gun with the accuracy of a sniper rifle and the mobility of a carbine. "How long have you been working on this?" Weber asked, running his fingers along the rifle's modular construction. Rudolf thought of his father's workshop, of dismantled clocks scattered across wooden benches, of his brother Klaus, who would never see this moment. "All my life, Colonel. All my life." The path here had begun in the shadow of 2 world wars, in a village where precision was not just craftsmanship, but survival itself. Rudolf Amsler had grown up as the son of a clockmaker, in a place where his father had spent the war years maintaining timepieces for both German and Allied forces who crossed into Swiss territory. The old man had taught young Rudolf that neutrality meant serving accuracy above politics. "Precision has no nationality," his father used to say. "A clock keeps time the same way for everyone. But clocks didn't kill people, rifles did." And Rudolf knew that every army that adopted his creation would gain an advantage that could determine the outcome of battles, campaigns, entire wars. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it only reinforced his determination to make the weapon perfect, so perfect that it might end conflicts quickly before they could claim more lives like Klaus. Weber was still examining the rifle when the radio crackled with news from the outside world. Afghanistan, Nicaragua, proxy wars where soldiers carried outdated weapons against enemies equipped with the latest technology. Rudolf closed his eyes and listened to the reports, knowing that within months his creation might be in the hands of those same soldiers. "When can we begin production trials?" Weber asked. Rudolf looked out at the snow-covered mountains, thinking of all the times Klaus had pointed toward those peaks and talked about climbing them. His brother had died because of imprecise equipment, a carabiner that failed under stress, tolerances that weren't tight enough. Rudolf's pursuit of perfection had become personal that day. He would never again allow imprecision to cost lives. "The rifle is ready now," Rudolf said quietly. "The question is, whether we are ready for what it will do to the world. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp, and stay with us for the next chapters. How do you create perfection when you know it will be used to destroy? The converted barn outside Neuhausen had become Rudolf's sanctuary and prison. For 3 years, since 1983, when the Swiss military issued specifications that seemed impossible, this place had consumed his life. The requirements still hung on the wall, yellowed with age. Create a rifle accurate enough for Alpine marksmen, reliable enough for conscript soldiers, and adaptable enough for the diverse combat scenarios that Switzerland's defensive doctrine required. Traditional gunmakers had scoffed at the requirements, claiming that accuracy and durability were mutually exclusive in military weapons. But Rudolf had seen opportunity where others saw contradiction. He'd started with a revelation that defied conventional wisdom. Instead of compromising between competing demands, he would engineer a system where each requirement reinforced the others. The workshop smelled of gun oil and metal shavings, but underneath lurked the familiar scent of his father's old timepieces. Rudolf kept several of them on his workbench: a pocket watch that had belonged to a German officer, a wristwatch worn by an American pilot. Both had passed through his father's hands during the war. Both had kept perfect time, regardless of which uniform their owners wore. His rotating bolt system, inspired by those precision mechanics, provided the consistent lockup necessary for accuracy while distributing stress evenly for reliability. The free-floating barrel, a concept borrowed from target rifles, maintained precision even under the thermal stress of rapid fire. On paper, it was elegant. In reality, it had taken years of failure to make it work. Rudolf, the voice, belonged to Maria, his assistant, and the only person who'd stayed when funding was cut and his team scattered. The NATO observers are here. Through the barn's window, Rudolf could see the black cars arriving through the Swiss snow, representatives from Germany, Britain, France, all coming to witness what they hoped would be the future of infantry weapons. The Cold War's demands had created a market for innovation, and every Western nation needed an edge against Soviet numerical superiority. The first prototypes had failed catastrophically. Rudolf remembered the humiliation of those early demonstrations. Rifles that jammed during crucial tests, feeding failures that made military officials dismiss his approach as the fantasy of a clockmaker trying to build weapons. His funding had been reduced, his reputation nearly destroyed. For 6 months he'd worked alone, surviving on savings and stubbornness. But now, watching the observers file into his testing area, Rudolf felt the weight of what he'd accomplished. The SIG SG 550 that lay before them represented a new philosophy in small arms design. Its modular construction allowed the same basic platform to serve as assault rifle, marksman weapon, or carbine, depending on mission requirements. Its accuracy approached that of purpose-built sniper rifles, while maintaining the reliability needed for harsh field conditions. General Harrison, the British observer, picked up the rifle with practiced hands. The weight feels right. How does it perform in adverse conditions? Swiss winters test everything, Rudolf replied. If it works here, it will work anywhere. What he didn't say was how the breakthrough had come during a December blizzard, when he'd realized that his failures had been caused not by design flaws, but by manufacturing tolerances that were impossibly tight by military standards, yet achievable through Swiss precision machining. He'd rebuilt the prototype using techniques borrowed from the watch industry, creating components that fit together with what Maria called mechanical poetry. The demonstration that followed was flawless. Shot after shot found its mark, regardless of firing position or environmental conditions. The observers took notes, asked technical questions, and tried unsuccessfully to find the weapon's limits. When the weapon finally functioned as designed, its accuracy was so extraordinary that test officials initially suspected measurement errors. "How many units can you produce annually?" asked the German representative. "That depends," Rudolf said carefully, "on how many you think the world needs." It was an honest question. Military trials would soon reveal capabilities that transformed tactical thinking. Units equipped with the SG 550 would be able to engage targets at ranges previously reserved for specialized marksmen while maintaining the rate of fire needed for close combat. The weapon's precision would allow smaller units to achieve fire superiority against larger forces, fundamentally altering the mathematics of Alpine defense and beyond. As the observers departed, Rudolf stood alone in his workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of his failures and the reality of his success. NATO representatives, initially skeptical of Swiss claims, had just witnessed demonstration after demonstration that challenged their assumptions about what was possible in military small arms. Maria found him there an hour later, staring at the rifle that would soon change warfare itself. "Any regrets?" she asked. Rudolf thought of Klaus, of his father's workshop, of all the soldiers who would carry his creation into battles not yet imagined. "Ask me again in 10 years, when we see what the world has done with it." Outside, the Swiss Alps stood eternal and neutral, their snow-covered peaks indifferent to the human dramas played out in their shadow. But Rudolf knew that neutrality was an illusion. His rifle would take sides whether he wanted it to or not. The letter from Klaus arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 1987, 6 months after his death. Rudolf found it tucked between technical specifications and purchase orders from foreign militaries, his brother's handwriting as familiar as his own heartbeat. It had been lost in the postal system, forgotten in some Alpine sorting facility, only to surface now like a ghost from simpler times. "Rudolf," it began in Klaus's careful script. "By the time you read this, I'll be attempting the north face of the Matterhorn. If something goes wrong, I want you to know that precision isn't just about making things work. It's about making them work when everything depends on it. Remember what Father taught us about tolerance and balance. Some things can't afford to fail." Rudolf set the letter down with trembling hands. Klaus had written it the night before the climbing accident that killed him, somehow knowing that his brother's pursuit of perfection would need a reminder of why precision mattered. Outside the workshop in Neuhausen, spring was beginning to soften the Swiss countryside, but Rudolf felt only the chill of memory. The irony cut deep. Klaus had died because of imprecise equipment, a carabiner manufactured with tolerances too loose for life-or-death situations. Now Rudolf's pursuit of that same precision had created a weapon so accurate that armies across NATO were competing for production rights. Maria entered with a stack of international newspapers, their headlines painting a picture of a world in flux. The Cold War's proxy conflicts raged from Central America to Southeast Asia, each theater demanding newer, more effective weapons. Soviet forces maintained their doctrine of overwhelming numbers and rapid mechanized advances, but Western military planners were beginning to see possibilities in Rudolf's philosophy of precision over quantity. "The Germans want to license production," Maria reported. "The Americans are offering to buy the entire design outright." Rudolf nodded absently, his attention caught by a photograph in one of the papers. Afghan Mujahideen fighters, barely visible in mountain terrain, armed with obsolete rifles against Soviet armor. He wondered how many of them might have lived if they'd had access to weapons capable of precision engagement at extended ranges. The challenge that had arrived in 1983 seemed simple in hindsight. Create a rifle that met Switzerland's defensive needs in an era of rapidly evolving warfare. Traditional gunmakers had failed because they couldn't see beyond the conventional wisdom that accuracy and durability were mutually exclusive. Rudolf had succeeded because he'd approached the problem like a clockmaker, understanding that every component must work in harmony with every other component, but success carried burdens he hadn't anticipated. Every military contract meant his creation would influence conflicts he'd never imagined. The SIG SG-550's influence was already extending far beyond Switzerland's borders, demonstrating that the future belonged to weapons that combined multiple capabilities rather than optimizing for single roles. Colonel Weber arrived that afternoon with news from the latest field trials. Swiss mountain troops had put the rifle through scenarios designed to simulate Alpine warfare. Long-range precision shots followed immediately by close-quarters engagements, thermal stress testing in conditions that would destroy traditional weapons, reliability assessments under the kind of abuse conscript soldiers might inflict. Every test confirms the same result, Weber said. This weapon changes everything. Small units can now engage effectively at ranges that previously required specialized equipment. The tactical implications are staggering. Rudolf listened to the briefing while examining Klaus's letter. His brother's words about precision and failure seemed prophetic now. The weapons design philosophy was already influencing a generation of military rifles, from the German G-36 project to advanced American platforms under development. Armies worldwide were recognizing that modern warfare demanded precision and adaptability over raw firepower. How many nations have expressed interest? Rudolf asked. 17 so far, Weber replied. And that's just the official inquiries. 17 nations. 17 different armies that would train their soldiers on his creation. 17 different ways his pursuit of perfection might alter the balance of power in regions across the globe. The engineer, who had begun with the simple goal of protecting Swiss neutrality, found himself responsible for changing how wars would be fought. That evening, Rudolf sat in his father's old workshop, surrounded by the timepieces that had inspired his approach to weapon design. Each clock kept perfect time, indifferent to the politics of their former owners. But rifles weren't clocks. Rifles chose sides simply by existing, by being more accurate in the hands of one soldier than another. He reread Klaus's letter one final time before filing it away with his technical drawings. His brother's death had driven him to perfect his craft, but perfection in weapons meant something different than perfection in mountaineering equipment. When a carabiner failed, one person died. When a rifle succeeded too well, the consequences rippled across continents. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. What happens when your greatest achievement becomes the world's newest burden? The winter of 1987 brought unexpected visitors to Rudolf's workshop outside Neuhausen. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived with credentials from the International Committee of the Red Cross and questions that cut deeper than any military evaluation. She wanted to understand not just how the SIG SG-550 worked, but what its existence meant for the wounded soldiers she treated in conflict zones around the world. "I've seen what precise weapons do to human bodies," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Rudolf's workbench. "Your rifle will make every shot more likely to kill rather than wound. That changes battlefield medicine fundamentally." Rudolf had never considered this perspective. His focus had been on creating a weapon so accurate and reliable that conflicts would end quickly, before they could escalate into the kind of prolonged slaughter that marked the proxy wars raging across 3 continents. But Dr. Vasquez forced him to confront a darker calculation. Precision in killing was still killing. "How many soldiers have you treated?" Rudolf asked. "Enough to know that most weapons wound more than they kill," she replied. "The wounded can be saved, the dead cannot. Your rifle tips those odds in ways that concern me." Outside, the Swiss Alps held their winter silence, snow falling steadily on peaks that had watched neutrality erode over decades of global conflict. The Cold War's proxy theaters, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Angola, had become testing grounds for weapons technology, each innovation measured in casualty statistics that rarely reached civilian newspapers. Maria brought tea, and sat quietly as Dr. Vasquez explained her mission. The Red Cross was conducting what she called an ethical assessment of emerging weapons technologies. Rudolph's rifle had drawn attention because early field reports suggested it achieved kill ratios that exceeded anything previously seen in infantry weapons. The Germans tested it against Soviet equipment in simulated scenarios, Dr. Vasquez continued. Units equipped with your rifle achieved fire superiority against forces 3 times their size. That's not just tactical innovation. It's a fundamental shift in how wars will be fought. Rudolph had seen those same reports. Military trials revealed capabilities that transformed tactical thinking, allowing smaller units to engage effectively at ranges previously reserved for specialized marksmen while maintaining the rate of fire needed for close combat. The weapon's precision allowed mathematical advantages that military planners were still calculating. But Dr. Vasquez was asking different questions. What happened to international humanitarian law when one side possessed dramatically superior weapons? How did medical corps plan for casualty patterns that no longer followed historical models? If Rudolph's rifle prevented wars by making them too costly for aggressors, was that worth the price in asymmetric lethality? "I need to show you something," Rudolph said finally, leading her to his father's workshop. The older space still smelled of clock oil and brass filings. Timepieces from 2 world wars lined the shelves, German chronometers, Allied navigation instruments, Soviet field watches. His father had maintained them all with equal care during the war years, serving accuracy above politics, as Rudolph had been taught to do. "My father believed that precision serves everyone equally," Rudolph explained. "A clock keeps time the same way regardless of who owns it. I thought weapons could work the same way." Dr. Vasquez examined one of the German chronometers, its movement still keeping perfect time after 40 years. "But weapons aren't clocks, Mr. Amsler. They don't serve everyone equally. They serve whoever pulls the trigger." The conversation continued through the afternoon, touching on questions Rudolph had avoided confronting. His design philosophy influenced weapons development in nations whose tactical doctrines he barely understood. The rifle's modular construction made it adaptable to scenarios he'd never imagined, in climates and conflicts that bore no resemblance to Alpine warfare. When Dr. Vasquez finally prepared to leave, she asked one final question. "If you could uninvent this weapon, would you?" Rudolph considered the question while watching snow fall on his brother's memorial garden. Klaus had died because equipment failed when precision mattered most. The SIG SG-550 would never fail that way. Its components fit together with mechanical poetry, its tolerances maintained through Swiss precision manufacturing techniques borrowed from the watch industry. But success carried unexpected burdens. Dozens of nations sought to acquire or copy his creation, forcing him to confront the reality that his pursuit of perfection would influence conflicts he'd never imagined. The engineer, who had begun with the simple goal of protecting Swiss neutrality, found himself responsible for changing the balance of power in regions across the globe. "Ask me again in 10 years, Rudolph said finally, "when we see what the world has done with it." Dr. Vasquez nodded and departed into the Swiss winter, leaving Rudolph alone with his creation and his doubts. Outside, the Alps stood eternal and indifferent, their neutrality more honest than any human claim to the same virtue. That night, Rudolph worked late in his workshop, adjusting tolerances that were already perfect, seeking in mechanical precision the moral clarity that seemed to elude him. The rifle's accuracy was extraordinary. Test officials had initially suspected measurement errors when they saw the results, but accuracy in engineering was simpler than accuracy in ethics. He thought of Dr. Vasquez's patience, of Klaus's letter, of his father's quiet wisdom about serving precision above politics. The man who had once dismantled clocks in his father's workshop had created something that would outlast them both. Whether that legacy represented progress or tragedy remained to be seen. The secret arrived in an unmarked envelope on a February morning in 1988, delivered by a courier who refused to give his name. Inside, Rudolf found a classified report from a NATO field exercise in Norway, marked with stamps he didn't recognize and signatures that meant nothing to him. But the contents changed everything. He thought he understood about his creation. The report detailed a combat simulation where a single squad equipped with SIG SG 550 rifles had eliminated an opposing force of 36 soldiers in under 7 minutes. The engagement had taken place at ranges varying from 400 meters to close quarters, demonstrating the weapon's adaptability across the full spectrum of infantry combat. What made Rudolf's hands shake wasn't the tactical success. It was the clinical precision of the language describing human beings as eliminated threats. Maria found him an hour later, staring at the report with the expression of a man confronting an unwelcome truth. "What is it?" she asked. Rudolf handed her the document without speaking. He'd known his rifle would change warfare, but seeing the mathematics of lethality reduced to statistical analysis felt like watching his father's clocks being used to time executions. Precision had no morality, but the uses of precision certainly did. The report included photographs from the exercise, soldiers advancing through Norwegian forests with Rudolf's rifles, their movements confident in ways that spoke to the weapon's reliability under harsh conditions. Most remarkably, the weapon achieved its performance while remaining light enough for mountain troops and simple enough for conscript soldiers to maintain. "This is what we wanted, isn't it?" Maria asked quietly. "Weapons that end conflicts quickly, before they can escalate." Rudolf wasn't sure anymore. The SIG SG 550 that emerged from his obsession represented a new philosophy in small arms design, but philosophies had consequences beyond their creators' intentions. The rifle's modular construction allowed the same basic platform to serve as assault rifle, marksman weapon, or carbine, depending on mission requirements. Its accuracy approached that of purpose-built sniper rifles while maintaining the reliability needed for harsh field conditions. But the Norwegian exercise revealed something troubling. The weapon was too good. Units equipped with SG 550s could engage targets at ranges previously reserved for specialized marksmen while maintaining the rate of fire needed for close combat. The weapon's precision allowed smaller units to achieve fire superiority against larger forces, fundamentally altering the mathematics of warfare in ways that might make conflicts more likely, not less. Dr. Vasquez returned that afternoon, as if summoned by Rudolf's crisis of conscience. She'd been monitoring reports from various theaters where early production models were being field tested. Her news wasn't encouraging. "Afghanistan," she said, settling into her familiar chair. "Mujahideen fighters equipped with your rifles have achieved kill ratios that are unprecedented in mountain warfare. The Soviets are requesting their own production licenses." Rudolf felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Cold War's proxy conflicts were becoming testing grounds for his creation, each theater revealing new applications he'd never considered. NATO observers, initially skeptical of Swiss claims, had witnessed demonstration after demonstration that challenged their assumptions about what was possible in military small arms. "How many have been produced?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Nearly 800, Rudolf replied, with orders for thousands more. The numbers felt abstract until he considered what each rifle represented, a force multiplier that could determine the outcome of engagements across multiple continents. The SG 550's influence was extending far beyond Switzerland's borders, demonstrating that the future belonged to weapons that combined multiple capabilities rather than optimizing for single roles. That evening, Rudolf visited his father's workshop for what felt like the last time. The timepieces still kept perfect time, their mechanical precision unchanged by decades of political upheaval. But looking at them now, he understood something his father had never told him. Neutrality was a luxury that precision couldn't afford. The Norwegian report had included a final section that haunted Rudolf's thoughts. The exercise's conclusion noted that traditional military doctrine would need complete revision to account for weapons that achieved the SG-550's performance characteristics. Small unit tactics, force deployment, engagement rules, everything would change to accommodate the mathematical advantage his rifle provided. "I wanted to save lives," Rudolf said aloud to his father's memory. "But precision in killing is still killing." Maria found him there at midnight, surrounded by clocks that marked time with indifferent accuracy. "The Americans called," she said. "They want to discuss exclusive licensing for a new variant. Something about urban warfare applications." Rudolf nodded without looking up from the German chronometer he'd been examining. His design philosophy was influencing a generation of military rifles, from the German G-36 to advanced American platforms, as armies worldwide recognized that modern warfare demanded precision and adaptability over raw firepower. But influence carried responsibility, and Rudolf was beginning to understand the weight of what he'd created. The man who had once dismantled clocks in his father's workshop had built something that would outlast them both. Whether that represented progress or catastrophe depended on choices that were no longer his to make. Outside, the Swiss Alps held their eternal silence, their peaks indifferent to human moral struggles. But Rudolf knew that his neutrality had ended the moment he'd solved the impossible equation of accuracy and reliability. His rifle would take sides in every conflict it entered, and those sides would be determined by whoever held the trigger. The secret wasn't in the classified report. It was in what the report revealed about his own illusions. He'd thought he was building a tool for peace. Instead, he'd created the most precisely lethal infantry weapon the world had ever seen. 10 years later, Rudolf Amsler sat in a restaurant in Geneva across from a journalist who wanted to write about the man behind the rifle. Snow fell outside the windows, reminiscent of that winter day in 1986 when everything had changed. Between them lay a folder containing newspaper clippings from 36 countries, each one documenting how the SIG SG-550 had altered the course of conflicts most people couldn't even pronounce. "Do you have any regrets?" the journalist asked. Rudolf considered the question while studying the photographs spread across the table. German border guards carrying his rifles during the fall of the Berlin Wall, British special forces in the Falklands, American soldiers in Somalia. Each image represented a choice he'd never made but somehow influenced. The success had been extraordinary by any measure. For Rudolf, however, success carried unexpected burdens. He had created a weapon so effective that dozens of nations sought to acquire or copy it, forcing him to confront the reality that his pursuit of perfection would influence conflicts he had never imagined. "I used to think precision was morally neutral," Rudolf said finally. "Like my father's clocks, serving accuracy above politics. But weapons choose sides simply by being more accurate in some hands than others." The journalist scribbled notes while Rudolf explained the philosophical journey that had begun with Klaus's death and led to the most significant advancement in infantry weapons since the assault rifle itself. The SIG SG-550's influence had extended far beyond Switzerland's borders, demonstrating that the future belonged to weapons that combined multiple capabilities rather than optimizing for single roles. His design philosophy had influenced a generation of military rifles, from the German G-36 to advanced American platforms, as armies worldwide recognized that modern warfare demanded precision and adaptability over raw firepower. But influence meant responsibility, and responsibility meant confronting uncomfortable truths about innovation's unintended consequences. "The Cold War ended," Rudolf continued, "but the weapons remain. That's always the problem with tools. They outlast the problems they were designed to solve." Outside, Geneva's streets bustled with the quiet prosperity of Swiss neutrality, a luxury that Rudolf's creation had helped both preserve and complicate. NATO's technological advantage during the final years of the Cold War had included his rifle's contribution to small unit effectiveness. But peace had revealed new applications for precision lethality. The journalist asked about specific conflicts, but Rudolf had stopped tracking them years earlier. Each news report felt like watching his father's clock's time events he'd rather not measure. Drug wars in Colombia, where his rifles appeared in government hands. Peacekeeping operations in the Balkans, where precision prevented escalation. Border disputes across Africa, where accuracy determined survival. "Dr. Vasquez still writes to me," Rudolf said, thinking of the Red Cross physician who had forced him to confront his creation's moral implications. She says medical corps finally adapted their protocols for the casualty patterns your rifle creates. More deaths, fewer wounded, cleaner mathematics. The phrase haunted Rudolf, even as he spoke it. Cleaner mathematics, as if death could be optimized like mechanical tolerance. But that was exactly what he'd accomplished. Mathematical optimization of lethality through engineering precision. Maria arrived as the interview concluded, carrying a package that Rudolf recognized immediately. Inside lay a chronometer his father had maintained during World War II, recently returned by the family of its original owner. The mechanism still kept perfect time, its precision unchanged by decades of human conflict. "Some things endure," Maria observed. Rudolf nodded, understanding her meaning. The man who had once dismantled clocks in his father's workshop had created something that would outlast them both. But the question of legacy remained. Had he contributed to peace through deterrence, or simply raised the stakes of future conflicts? The journalist departed with his story, but Rudolf remained at the table, studying the chronometer's movement through its crystal caseback. Each component worked in harmony with every other component, just as he'd designed the SG 550's mechanisms. But harmony in engineering didn't guarantee harmony in application. That evening, Rudolf returned to the workshop outside Neuhausen, where it all began. The building had been converted to a small museum, documenting Swiss contributions to precision manufacturing. His rifle occupied a place of honor alongside historical examples of watchmaking, medical instruments, and optical equipment, all testament to the nation's commitment to mechanical excellence. A group of engineering students toured the facility as Rudolf watched from the shadows. Their guide explained how tolerance and balance created performance beyond the sum of individual parts, how Swiss precision had influenced industries from chronometry to ballistics. The students took notes and asked questions about manufacturing techniques, seeing only the elegance of solved problems. Rudolf remembered being their age, dismantling every mechanical device he could find, driven by curiosity about how things worked. That curiosity had led him to solve the impossible equation of accuracy and reliability, creating a weapon that changed warfare itself. But curiosity about mechanisms was simpler than wisdom about their consequences. Later, alone in the museum after closing, Rudolf stood before his creation's display case. The rifle looked harmless enough under museum lighting, its components labeled with technical descriptions that revealed nothing about the classified reports, the casualty statistics, the global influence that continued expanding years after its introduction. He thought of Klaus, of his father's workshop, of Dr. Vasquez's patience in forgotten conflicts around the world. The Swiss Alps, visible through the museum's windows, held their eternal silence, their peaks indifferent to human struggles with conscience and consequence. In the end, it wasn't the weapon itself that endured in Rudolf's memory, but the knowledge that sometimes the most profound changes emerge from the quiet determination to make something work exactly as it should, even when the world insists it cannot be done. Whether that change represented progress or tragedy depended on perspectives he could influence, but never control. The chronometer in his pocket kept perfect time, measuring moments that belonged to everyone equally. But the rifle in the display case would always belong to whoever held it, serving their purposes with the same mechanical precision that had once seemed so morally neutral. Outside, snow continued falling on the Swiss Alps, each flake settling with the same indifference that had marked that winter day when everything changed. Rudolf Amsler had solved the equation of perfect precision, but the mathematics of morality remained unsolved, continuing to accumulate like snow on mountains that had watched neutral ground become the birthplace of decisive advantage. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. What burdens do we carry when our greatest achievements outlast our intentions?